Welcome back, guys, to the farm. In today's video, I just wanted to touch base on the value-added products that you can actually produce in agriculture, and that's simply because one thing that I'm realizing each and every day is the fact that every time I go back out into the agro businesses where we go and buy supplies, and probably maybe they are supplies for for our quails or maybe chicken feed and other products that we buy from there. As a farmer, I'm quickly realizing that most of the products that we're buying from them, they are products that we're actually growing and selling them to some of the biggest companies that are working in this country, and probably maybe outside of this country in many cases, and they are buying raw materials that we are producing, and then they are adding value to those products, and then they export them back to us. Now, one perfect example I can give you, like today I went out to buy quail feed and chicken feed for the chickens that we're keeping here. For some of you who are new to this channel, but we also have quails, and we are also keeping pigs, and we are also keeping some other animals like goats and rabbits. So all these animals, one thing that they have in common is the fact that most of the feed that we actually give them, we don't produce them here. And a few companies that I know, the brands that we are normally buying from them, that are producing locally, they are not as cheap as you expect, considering that 90% of the products that they're using to produce these products are locally produced. But putting that aside, I think when you look back at the value chain of agriculture, as I've talked about that in my previous videos, adding value to products that are being produced by agricultural producers in farm is one of the best ways to increase productivity in this country, but also drive the economies, large economies that the government is promoting at the moment. So I wanted to make sure that I touch base on the ways that I think as small producers we can sort of like look at businesses that are producing agricultural supplies at larger scale, but then scale it down and do it at our level by making sure that we're not just doing them anyhow, but we are also kind of like doing them with a business mindset in place. What I'm trying to say is if you're going to go into agriculture and then probably grow crops or keep animals, I think one of the best ways would be to look at what you can do as a small producer, but look at it with a perspective of making sure that whatever you produce in your area of expertise, in your area of production, you're producing these items with the intent of actually adding value before you actually sell. A good example of what we're doing here on my farm is we are growing multiple crops, and these crops are predominantly related to one another, and we are being intent in the way how we are producing where we are growing these crops, simply because we want to make sure that at one point down the road, when we are ready to add value to these products, once we have harvested them, we want to make sure that 80 to 90% of all the raw materials that we need to produce an added value type of a product in the agricultural industry is possible. One of them is we are growing soybeans, we are growing corn, we are growing other legume plants that actually go into the production of chicken feed, quail feed, but also pig feed. This is one of the best ways of making sure that when you grow crops on your farm, you are able to actually add value. Adding value is all about finding a way of actually doing something that you can do at a price point possible, to make sure that the next person you ask to pay a price for whatever you are asking for, they should see that you took an effort. A good example that I gave when I was when I was talking about how we are producing, how we are growing beans here on my farm, is the fact that in UK, when I walk into Aldi or in Asda or in Tesco or in Sainsbury's, the beans that I buy from there, they're either canned or maybe they are packaged in a pack. And in many cases, those companies that are packaging and canning those beans, they are not necessarily the people who grew them. Especially where you are able to grow these crops at larger scale, right? Then I think you should be able to kind of like package these beans in either in a box or in a very well branded packaging, and then ship them to places where these products are sold, like in shops, like in UK or even in local markets here in Malawi. The other thing that I've also been thinking about is I wanted to kind of like just talk about how you could go about doing this as a small scale producer, right? So one of the best ways, I think, if you wanted to add value to the products that you're producing in agriculture, is not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but I think if you had to look at some of the biggest producers of chicken feed and the quail feed in my country, these guys are doing this at larger scale. But if you had to go and do it, you would want to go and do it at a smaller scale. But you have to understand how they are doing whatever they are doing at a larger scale, and that involves sort of like a reverse engineering what they are doing, so that you can understand the business model in the first place. All right. My point here is, if you're going to do it, especially, I would give you an example, like in our case here. What we've done is we've looked at some of the things that we want to do. We've looked at how we want to rear chickens, we've looked at the way how we want to keep our quails, and then we've looked at how we are keeping our pigs as well, and what we need to make sure that these animals, they are very well nourished and they are eating high quality type of feed, and in that context, we've kind of like started with the end in mind, right? So when you start with the end in mind, it means you've kind of like mapped out the whole value chain of chicken production. What is it that you want to actually produce high quality, chicken, broiler chicken? And if you're going to keep layers like we are doing here, you have to start with the end in mind. In my case, if you have to look at what we are doing, the small production capacity, you're looking at chickens that are kind of like consuming anywhere between 400 to 600 kgs of chicken feed per day, right? Now, that kind of like gives you a clear picture of how much corn you would have to produce to make sure that you can actually feed these chickens, let's say maybe for 2 to 6 months. Because one of the biggest challenges when you're keeping chickens, especially when you're keeping chicken layers, is the fact that the cost of feed is very exorbitant. It's very expensive to keep chicken layers because you have to spend money for up to 16 or 18 weeks before you actually start seeing money. And this is also one of the things I think most farmers who are just getting started from scratch, they don't really kind of like understand what kind of business model they're getting into when everybody is talking about starting a poultry chicken. Start a poultry chicken. But poultry farming is kind of like a J-curve type of business model. What it means is you get to spend a lot of money for the first 16 to 18 weeks before you actually start picking those eggs and then start selling them and then start seeing the revenue that you can reinvest in the business when you need to buy feed. Which means if you don't plan out how you're going to stretch your chicken feed to get to a point where now you are getting a bit of revenue coming into the business, you might end up getting stuck in the middle of the way, simply because chicken feed is expensive. Just today, I was in one of my local trading centers here, and the bag of chicken feed that I normally buy for that I normally buy in the city come here. It was 14,000 more expensive than when I buy them from Lilongwe. Now, I have a privilege because I'm in the middle of nowhere here, out in the field, in the countryside, right? But I'm also living in the city, which means I have a chance to actually go in the city, compare the prices, what people are paying, the prices farmers are paying in the city and the prices that local farmers are paying here, where I'm doing the farming in the countryside. And when I noticed that the prices are almost 14,000 Malawi kwacha, that's the difference buying them locally here. And simply because I was only buying a little quantity, I said, okay, I'll just get probably maybe only 50 bags, and the rest of all these other bags that I need, I'm gonna have to go and buy them from the city on Tuesday and then bring them down here, right? So it pays a great deal when you know how to grow the crops, the type of crops where you can add value. And in this context, if you're going to grow corn, like I'm doing on my piece of land, if you're going to grow your own soya and then turn that into quail feed or chicken feed, for your layers or for your broiler chickens, it helps because you can actually cut the prices of taking care of the animals up to 80%. So really, my point here is, if you're going to do this, if you're starting a new business idea in 2024, or if you're starting a new business this year, look at the business model that you're actually getting into and look around if there are other businesses that are doing that. Then reverse engineer from that. Start with the end in mind. You have to start with the end in mind. And then if you want that business to be profitable, I think it makes sense for you to make sure that the crops that you're growing, they should complement what you're doing. Like I've said, guys, we have rabbits here, we have pigs, we have chickens, we have quails. All these animals, to somebody who don't know the type of crops that we are growing here and the kind of value that we can extract from them, they would think that each and everything that we are feeding them is bought from the shop. But contrary to that, most of the feed that we're giving them, some of it is actually being produced locally here. We are producing right here on my piece of land, and then we are feeding them. Only a small portion of it we are getting them from from the suppliers who are supplying us, and then we are able to feed them. And the whole goal is, the goal here is to make sure that we can reduce the cost of keeping the animals, so that we can maximize on profitability. And if you're going to do this, I would urge you to start, with the end in mind. Think about what it would look like if you started a poultry farm today, and you started it on an acre of land where you're growing your own corn, where you are able to sort of like buy soya beans from a local supplier, and then you can take it to a roast house where they can roast it for you, and then go and buy some of the other, some of the other ingredients like the oils, the fish meal, and these other bits and pieces that you need to put together, so that you can sort of like reduce the cost of keeping your pet. And mind you, most of the chicken feed that I'm using here, if it's not coming from outside of the country, if it's being produced locally by companies that are actually buying the supplies from my neighbors, right? So why not you? Why shouldn't you produce your own chicken feed, right? So if the government is promoting, value addition to agricultural products that are being produced, I think that's something that we need to embrace as farmers. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to spend tens of millions to actually do this. There's this organization the government is using to promote value addition to products, as the government is understanding that making sure that local, small producers, small farmer producers who are producing produce here in Malawi, they are the backbone of this economy. They are the ones who are going to drive economics of scale in the near future, simply because we've always been an importing country, but now the government is promoting, self-sustenance and making sure that you're buying local, but you're not just buying local, products that are raw. The government is trying to cut on the export of raw materials rather than exporting materials where you've added value. And I think Agricom is also it's promoting this in a very smart way, because what they are doing is they are actually giving grants to local cooperatives who are actually buying equipment so that they can mechanize their farming. My farm is sitting on 15 hectares of land that I own. I don't have a tractor here. I don't have any mechanical equipment that I'm using. I'm literally using humans to actually do this kind of work. In a world where I had all the resources and whatever gizmos I would want to have tractors plowing and helping me, to do all sorts of things. You can see in my background some of my members of staff, they're running up and down, fetching water. Some of them are dragging irrigation pipes, trying to water the crops and things like that. Some of the guys are weeding the garden here, things like that. In Western economies, especially like in UK, where I have spent almost 2 decades, you don't find somebody working in a sweltering heat like this, right? Trying to weed the garden, but I'm trying to make do with what I have. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. But I'm very optimistic. I can tell you that, because this invitation means I'm joining a growing number of local farmers who are coming together to put this cooperative together so that we can go for the Agricom grants, so that we can get mechanized, we can get our own, we can get our own equipment that we can use to add value to products that we are producing locally here, right? So, like I said, if you're going to do this at a smaller scale, look for a business that you can actually reverse engineer, but you should also think of starting with an end in mind. Not only that, I want you to think about this. Each and every battle that has been won, right? It's always been won simply because somebody strategically thought about how to go about fighting that battle and then winning it. So if you're starting farming this year, it doesn't matter which part of the world you live, I want you to think about the end. Whenever you're starting, start with the end in mind. What is it that you want to do? In my case, I can see down the road, I'm going to be selling value-added products produced locally here on my own piece of land, either selling them to locals or internationally, but they are produced here, branded here, packaged here, and sold overseas. That's what we call agricultural value addition. All right? I'll see you later in another video, guys. Cheers.